Hello, we're going to take a look at a time period um, after the Maccabean period when the Hebrew people were taken over by the Romans. And so we're going to look at the Roman occupation of Judea, the rise of Christianity, the Jewish resistance, and the Diaspora. That's a big subject, and I'm going to get through this as quickly as possible. So we already looked back at 164 BC when the Maccabees revolted against the Hellenistic occupiers, in other words, the Greek Syrians. And from 142 BC, for the next 80 years, Judea was once again an independent Jewish state. It was its own country again. However, in the year 63 BC, Rome is going to conquer Judea and make it a province of their empire. There was a Roman ruler named Pompey who ended up taking over this region. And though the Jews were granted some measure of autonomy in Jerusalem, Judea was in reality ruled from Rome. In 37 BC, following a failed Jewish rebellion, the Romans turned Judea into a regular Roman province. And they installed a royal governor that was known as King Herod. After his death in 4 BC, the province was divided between Herod's son. One of them was a man named Herod Antipas, and that's in the New Testament of the Bible, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But what was religion like in Rome? To understand what was going on, you have to understand the religious aspect. So, religion in Rome was polytheistic. Now, polytheism, poly means many. The Romans had many gods. They had adopted basically the Greek gods, which we're going to go over later in the year, and renamed them. For example, Zeus became Jupiter, and Hades became Pluto. Okay, you get the gist of what I'm talking about here. But it was basically the Greek gods. Now, the Romans worshipped the gods in daily rituals, but most Roman citizens were not very emotional about their religion. They did what they had to do, and they left it be. But in Judaic culture, a relationship with one God, a monotheistic religion with one God, was a very emotional thing. And inside this Roman Empire, you have this huge group of people with many different beliefs and thoughts and mind processes. So sensitivity to the locals was not always the most important thing. But however, they were able to conquer this large region because they were able to incorporate these cultures into the Roman Empire. And so how would you think the Romans treated people they conquered who had different religions? Well, surprisingly, most emperors were somewhat tolerant of other religions, at least in comparison to empires of the past. Very much like the Persian Empire, they allowed some religious freedom. However, they expected everyone in their empire to respect Roman gods as a sign of loyalty to Rome itself. Now, that was unacceptable to the Jewish people. In 63 BC, the Romans conquered the Hebrew kingdom of Judea and allowed quote-unquote Romanized Jews who showed respect to Roman gods and obeyed Roman laws to govern Judea. Of course, the other Hebraic people viewed them as traitors And so you have this rift going on in Israel at that time period. Jews are monotheistic. That means they believe in one God. We already talked about that. That God's name was Yahweh. They don't even dare spell it out. You've seen that before as well. And so many of the Hebrews began to resist Roman rule, and they believed that God would send a Messiah, someone who would restore the kingdom to the Jewish people. Now, while this is the backdrop to a major event in world history, and that is the birth of Jesus. Many consider Jesus to be the Messiah who would restore control of Judea to the Jews. And when he was 30 years old, he began preaching a unique version of Judaism throughout Judea. Today, we call this version of Judaism Christianity. But at the time period, it wasn't split apart yet. What were the basic teachings of Jesus? And by the way, I know I have about 20 different denominations of students in my class when we talk about Christianity. I'm just going over the very basics. Simply put, Jesus did good works, he performed miracles, and he delivered his religious teachings on salvation and mercy. Jesus preached a religion based on the Jewish belief in a single God. Again, we call that monotheism, the belief in one God. Jesus taught that he was God's son and that God would rid the world of evil through him. He taught about God's love, mercy, forgiveness, grace towards people. And Jesus proclaimed that there would be eternal life in heaven for those who repented of their sins. And that was a big part of his teaching. A lot of he based his idea of good works on teachings from the Hebraic 10 Commandments. What kind of person would Christianity appeal to? Well, it basically appealed to the masses. It appealed to especially the poor and the common. And he acquired many followers. 12 of them became known as disciples. Well, this leads to an important question. How and why did Jesus die? Many in Judea did not accept the idea that Jesus was the Messiah. So you had one group of people that accepted that he was the Messiah and the Son of God. You had other people who were saying he was a nice teacher and a nice guy, and other people saying he was, doing miracles through the devil. And part of Jesus's message was that of equality under God, and the fact that everybody has to come to God the same way. And that threatened a position of many leading scholars in Judaism. And eventually, he would be brought before the religious leaders and be accused of a crime called blasphemy. 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 Guys, I don't know what's wrong with me today. Blasphemy is contempt for God. Contempt for God. In other words, speaking lies in a way that is just blatant, outright disrespect towards God. That was the belief of these religious leaders. At the same time, Roman rulers also feared Jesus' rising popularity amongst the Jewish people. They were concerned, and rightfully so, that there might be a rebellion against the Romans occupying Judea. They thought Jesus might lead a rebellion. If they listened to what he said, that's not what he was doing. but the fear was still there. In the year 29 AD, Jesus was arrested on the charges of blasphemy against Judaic law and by defying Roman authority. He was executed by crucifixion. Crucifixion is to be nailed to a cross. It's a very brutal form of death. It's torturous. And the reason the Romans favored this kind of punishment was because it sent a message. It was very, very public. And the cries of many crucified people could be heard for days. Jesus was crucified and died on the same day. After Jesus' death, the religion of Christianity was formed and began to spread. And it spread throughout the Mediterranean basin, through North Africa and through Europe. And one of the reasons it was able to spread, along with Judaism spreading, was because of the Roman road system and all the trade routes that the Romans had established. At this time period, even though the Romans were busy conquering other people beyond their borders, within their borders, it was peaceful. And so this time became known as the Pax Romana, which stands for the time of Roman peace. You didn't have wars against Rome inside the Roman Empire. Therefore, travel across the empire was pretty safe. And so ideas could spread like that of Christianity and Judaism. Well, we talked about the Judaic split between Judaism and Christianity. And Judaism was still very prevalent in Israel or Judea. And in the year 70, the Roman Emperor Titus quashed yet another Jewish rebellion. This time he decided to go for revenge, and the Jewish temple and the rest of Jerusalem was reduced to rubble. The only part remaining of the temple is still there today, and it is called the Western Wall, often referred to as the Wailing Wall. And it's a place where Hebrew people go and pray, even today. And often they'll take little small scraps of paper. If you look real close in the picture, you might be able to see that there are some cracks in the wall. And they'll take and they'll write prayers on their little scraps of paper and stuff them into the wall of the temple. Now, it's been a dream of the Jewish people for the Jewish temple to be rebuilt. But there is a major hang-up, and that is because you see that gold building behind the wall? That dome top? That is called the Dome of the Rock. And in Islam, which we're going to talk about much more later in the year, in Islam, this is also a sacred site. Muslims believe that Muhammad was taken up into heaven and he got to see heaven, and then he was brought back to earth at this site. And they built a mosque. Now, a mosque is a Muslim church or synagogue. It's a place of worship. And after he came back, he had written many parts of the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. So this site right here is the third most sacred site in Islam. It's also a sacred site for Christians because if you ever read the Bible, Jesus walked around in this temple and threw out the money changers and taught many of his lessons in this temple that used to be here, that is no longer here, but the Western Wall is. So it's important to Christianity as well. And so often you'll see, not literally worshiping together. In other words, they're not having a mass service like Christian, Muslim, Judaic service all in one. But you'll see Jewish people praying in one spot and doing their thing, and Christians literally just feet away doing their thing, and then up here at the mosque, just literally feet away from both groups, you may have Muslims doing their thing and praying as well. And you can see this all at once in a very small confined space. And it's one of the most awe-inspiring sights in the world today. It's also a source of conflict, and throughout time we've had wars over this particular spot in the world. And if I were a gambling man, I would venture to say that someday there might be a little bit of a conflict over this area once again. I don't know when and I don't know why, but just looking back in the past and seeing, like, for example, the Crusades and other events that have happened in time, it makes sense that it could happen again. Well, at the same time Jerusalem fell, many of the Jewish people fled Jerusalem to a fortress that is basically in the desert around the Dead Sea region. And this fortress is on top of a high cliff. You can see it in the picture. And it is called Masada. And in the year 70, the Romans began laying siege to this fortress. Now, within this community, there were 960 rebels, at least that's from the Roman perspective. The Romans were led by Flavius Silva, and he had a legion of 8,000 Romans with him. But they were not able to conquer this fortress. However, the Jewish people were very outnumbered. And so, slowly but surely, Flavius Silva had his legion begin building a siege wall up to Masada. It's on the western side of the mountain, and it was made of dirt, earthen, and wooden supports. And this took a long time, but eventually the Romans made it up to the top, and they entered into the fortress of Masada on April 15th in the year 73. And the Romans were expecting a fight once they got to the top, but instead they ran into eerie silence. And they looked around, and there were dead corpses all around. And what had happened was the leader of the Jewish people, his name was Ben-Yair, had instructed all the people in this fortress to commit mass suicide rather than be slaves of the Romans. And there were 7 people who did not commit suicide. They hid away. They would not allow themselves to be killed. And that's the only reason we know about what Ben-Yair said. There were 2 women and 5 children. They hid in the cisterns. And they then, when they were captured, they told their story. Now, the Romans were very good historians. And there was a Roman historian named Josephus, and he wrote a book called The War of the Jews about this particular time period on the siege of Masada. And he wrote, they had died in the belief that they had left not a soul of them alive to fall into Roman hands. The Romans advanced to the assault, seeing none of the enemy, but on all sides the awful solitude and flames within and silence. And they were at a loss to conjecture what had happened here. encountering the mass of slain instead of exulting as over their enemies. They admired the nobility of their resolve. There was one more major uprising in 135. You had something called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, and for a short time, Israel gained freedom from the Romans. Now, when I'm saying a short time, I literally mean it's like a year or two, or a 3-year period, under Jewish control. But the Romans eventually defeated the Jews, and then the Romans decided to put the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, and they took all the Jewish people and they deported them out of Israel. Those who had fought against the Romans were sold as slaves or they were killed. The Roman emperor was Hadrian at that time, and he leveled the city of Jerusalem to the ground and barred Jews from entering the city. In an attempt to definitively eliminate the Jewish connection to the land, the Romans renamed the land Judea to Palestinia, a word believed to be derived from the word the Philistines, a people from Crete, which 1,000 years earlier roamed the Mediterranean coast of Judea. Jews still lived in the area, though, and less than 100 years later, they were once again allowed to access Jerusalem. So what ended up happening was he had a lot of persecution of the Jews and the Christians, both during this time period. They were viewed as a problem to Roman emperors, somebody who might question their authority. So Jews and Christians, because they refused to worship Roman gods, were often put to death in gladiatorial games in Rome. These slaves often would be shipped to Rome, and they would either be slaved by gladiators, who were also slaves, by the way, and if they didn't do that, they would be killed, or fed to lions for the entertainment of the masses in a place called the Colosseum. The dispersal of the Judaic people across the globe today is known as the Diaspora. And what happened to the Jewish people is they literally were spread across Africa, Asia, and Europe. And they would no longer be connected to their ancestral homeland. It would not be until recent times, namely 1948, which isn't that long ago, that a Jewish nation state would exist again. However, the culture and religion of the Jewish people would remain strong despite many persecutions throughout history. And that's where we will pick it up tomorrow. All right, guys, have a wonderful day, and I hope you have a great week ahead as well.